So thank you very much for inviting me to share my passion. I am deeply passionate about this subject. But before we start, if it's okay, I'd just like to take a minute's silence because it's exactly a week since Shireen Modi died, and we're in the Museum of Goa, and I just think it would be really appropriate if we could just honour the contribution that she's made to the art scene in Goa and just take a moment to just honour that. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. So before we start, what I would love to do is just get a sense of who's in the room and what kind of organizations you're from, and sort of one thing that you're looking for from this talk, because I'm really passionate and I could give you this much information, and the question is, I want to be able to tailor it and target it in as much as possible to what your needs are. So maybe we could just go around, and so if you have an organization, because the topic is how can organizations collaborate for the SDGs, and so it'd be interesting to know what organizational affiliations we have here, and then that one thing. So Aditi, if you would.
Yeah. So I work for a career education company, and the work that we are trying to do is to think of career counseling more in terms of problem solving, so encouraging youth to think about what problems do you want to solve. And we use the SDG framework because it covers a lot of not only environmental issues but also social issues. So we ask students to think about the goal that you want to work towards.
And so one thing you'd like to get from the talk?
I think for me, since I'm in that school to work, school to education, so I'm interested in knowing what are the employment organizations that are working on the one hand related to SDGs, but also employment, what kind of employment is being generated, what's the linkage between those employment opportunities with education in colleges. So I'm interested in, knowing all kinds of people, I guess, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I do not come from an organization, I'm just a fresher architect who is very interested in sustainable architecture and sustainable development linked with architecture. So I'm just here to know how, just to learn, to experience, and that's all. It's just
Thank you.
Yeah, so I work in EdTech for college students. However, my objective here is just to learn more about sustainable development. I've been curious about this for a long time.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm Sukhbir. I'm here from the Smart Cities mission with my colleagues Puneet and Amrita. And we're looking at how partnerships can come through. And specifically from the talk, I would like to know how different organizations approach partnerships.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Puneet. He has already mentioned this. We are from Smart Cities mission, and I'm looking forward to how does collaboration happen, and can we fast track those things as well.
Hi, I'm Anindita. I'm from the same group. What I'd like to understand is the different ways that organizations can collaborate to advance the SDGs.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm from the Museum of Goa, but I would like to just talk about the Museum of Goa Foundation that is trying to work towards skill development, education and livelihood within the arts and culture sector. So where do we fit in, and how can we associate ourselves with this?
Thank you.
And my name is Shreya. I'm an artist and work in organizations, a few organizations in Goa. But I think past experiences hasn't been fulfilling, so now we're looking for new ways to be as well more organized and making organizations together.
Thank you.
I am Rahul from The Future We Need, and
we're trying to do something on the SDGs, and I'm trying to learn about strategies for collaboration.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Govind, and I guess my roots are in philanthropy and social business. And I think SDG 17 is partnership for the goals. So I guess I'm looking for advice on how one actually does that in a concrete way, especially from the point of view both funding and implementation.
Thank you.
My name is Lenny Menezes. I am retired from Kenya, but I'm involved quite intensely with some NGOs. One in Bombay called Sneha, where I sit on the board, and Parikrama in Bangalore, in the field of education. Also with Krima Foundation here in Goa as well as in Bombay. I was curious, I live next door, and it's a good way to spend a Sunday morning. So I'm here to listen and take away whatever, I can find that's useful in what I do.
Thank you.
What do we say about it? Let her talk about it.
Why the husband?
Salonians will be basically gypsies and whatever life makes out of us. So just lifelong learners, curious, we attend a lot of events and it all kind of circulates in the head, then gets downloaded in some nursery rhymes. So it's about just curiosity and learning.
Thank you.
Dean, as an architect, we realize that both architectural education and practice are really getting outdated. And I think we really need to look at all the other sort of layers that come into design, therefore.
Thank you.
My name is Walter. I'm a management trainer, engineering background, ex-defense. I've come with an open mind to learn something.
Thank you.
I'm Adrian Yakun. Actually, I'm representing my daughter. She works, because she couldn't make it for today.
Okay.
She works for the Workard Foundation.
Okay.
And she is trying to get companies in Goa to collaborate on things like e-learning, plans which they have, health camps, beating heart surgeries, heart replacement. And it's not an easy thing for her to persuade corporates to do anything for that. Workard doesn't want to do it totally on its own. So I'm hoping I could get something and maybe transfer it to her.
Thank you. Jack and Noreen. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So my name is Jack Linas. I'm from Netherlands. Sorry, I missed it.
So it's just whether you have, because the focus is organizational, so I'm just trying to get a sense of what kinds of organizations, if people are affiliated to organizations, we have in the room. And being a community member without affiliation is also just as valid a place to be. It's just to get a sense of who's here.
So I have a journalistic background. I was used to be working as a correspondent and journalist, but now I'm working for Video Volunteers, which is Goa-based. I'm developing journalistic content there, but I'm also getting involved. I am involved in HR and change management within the organization.
Thank you. And then the second part was, and what would you like to get? I'm going to try and meet everybody's needs in as much as I can. So
learn from your experiences, because mostly what I'm looking for in this phase of my life, professional life, is I'm looking for methodology. I know where I want to go, but by your story, your talk today, maybe I can learn more.
So, thanks.
So my name is Noreen van Holstein. I develop and execute programs in the cultural sector and social sector. And I've not come really with a specific learning, just really with an open mind to learn.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Now also you know who each other are, so afterwards there's a nice opportunity for more connection to take place. And I have a little bit of intel about how to focus things. So I thought maybe I could just start with a little bit about my story, and then go into sharing some of what I've learned and some of the frameworks that I found really helpful with you, and looking at some of the methodologies, some of the frameworks, some of the change management pieces, looking at how companies can get involved, working with government. So touching on a few of these things, and then we'll finish with a Q&A session afterwards. So firstly, I was really lucky. I started actually in my early 20s. I was working in marketing, and it wasn't really proving hugely satisfying for me. And so I decided to switch into corporate social responsibility. So this was 2002. You can do the math on how old I am. So about 17 years ago, I shifted into working with businesses on their social investment strategies. And I was really lucky, this was in London, and I was really lucky because I landed in a project that was actually an amazing example of how organizations can collaborate for social change. So the program was called Business Action on Homelessness. And I was taken in because I had private sector experience, because I was working in a marketing company, so I knew how to do account management. So I was hired, and this team consisted of Marks & Spencer's, Barclays Bank, KPMG, and then the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, which was Blair's government at that point. And it was because homelessness as a problem was massive in London and across the UK, and so that portfolio was brought within the Office of the sort of Deputy Prime Minister to make headway. And the reason I was lucky, because actually subsequent to that, I've worked on a lot of bad partnerships, and this was a really good one. What was really amazing about it was that the purpose of it was to engage companies, NGOs, the government, in supporting people who had been affected by homelessness to get back into work. So this employability piece that we're talking about. And what are some of the obstacles that stop people being able to enter the workplace? The reason why I think it was so successful was because not only did we manage to deliver whatever our target was 600 people. In India, that's not a very big amount of people. But was to deliver 600 placements of people who'd been affected by homelessness across 14 cities. And my job was to oversee these 14 cities and to find out how, in each city, you could mobilize business, local government, NGOs, all different schools, all different types of people and organizations within each city, and then scale that up at the national level. Good morning. So one of the things that was really amazing about it was that after actually only 18 months, we tried out this program, which was preparing people for work, giving people work placements, and then supporting them with a job coaching service. And each company was involved in something different. So Marks & Spencer, KPMG was leading the preparatory training, Marks & Spencer was leading on the placements, and then we had Bain & Co. later and Barclays who were leading on the post-work coaching. So what happened was different companies took a leadership role to champion a particular part of the program, and they invited their networks into support. So it was kind of like a sort of pyramid program, but for social good, in the terms that it was engaging people. Now, what was very exciting about it was at the end of this 600 placements, it wasn't what we learned through engaging in this 18-month experiment was we learned that there are a huge number of impediments for people to get into the workplace. Simple things like what ID proof is needed to be able to apply for a job when you get to that box. Little things that if you're homeless and you've had to leave home in a hurry, maybe there's serious violence at home or whatever, you don't have that one piece of paper, and that is what is stopping you. It's a silly thing. But what we learned through the 18 months of running the program was actually what changes companies need to make within their internal structures and recruitment processes to enable people who've been excluded from the workplace back in. Similarly, the NGOs that we worked with, whose job was trying to get people who'd been homeless into the workplace, were now suddenly working with the top HR professionals from the top FTSE 100 companies in the UK, and were learning how they now need to change the way they work with the people who've been affected, their clients, the people that we're working with. Similarly, the government, over the course of this journey, what we discovered is in England, you have something called a job seekers allowance. When you're looking for work, you get a benefit. 2 weeks after you have found a job, that benefit gets removed from you, and then you have to wait 6 months before you can access it again. And what we discovered over the course of this project was that most people, having monitored it, most people leave after 3 weeks. So they had lost their benefit, they couldn't apply for it for another year, another half year, and they were getting no money and they no longer had a job, and they were falling back into homelessness. So, because the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister was involved at a strategic level in this partnership, they just changed the policy. They changed it to 4 weeks. And so somehow, even though there was only these 600 placements, at the end of 18 months, we changed huge numbers of systems, internal to about 70 organizations, and policy, and the way in which organizations could be part of a more structural change. So I tell this story because it's a really good example about how, when we're collaborating for the SDGs, we can get very excited about our end goal and, you know, making a difference in that social space or whatever it is. But actually, a lot of the change that needs to happen is actually inside organizations. So it's not so much, oh, we're going to have 600 people are going to be at work now. It's about what are the structural change that means that 75,000 people or 1 million people can now be impacted. And that's really the power of partnerships, is not that you necessarily need to change at scale, but that you can prototype and work through things, learn, and then make necessary changes. That means over a longer period of time, you can get system change. Because if we look at some of the, goals, hang on, let me see if I can figure this out. I'm really sorry for the pixelation. We couldn't figure out what to do. So I don't know if you can see it. It says no poverty, no hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, clean energy, good jobs and economic growth, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption, protect the planet, life below water, life on land, peace and justice, partnerships for the goals. So this is the international framework called the Sustainable Development Goals that have been agreed across the world as being our framework for creating a fair and sustainable world. And the thing about them, and the reason why this, oh, crikey, sorry. The reason why the 17 one is there is because if you look at something like sustainably cities and communities or responsible consumption, there's no way we're going to be able to move on these things unless a lot of different types of people work together. Like just responsible consumption. Is it a company that can make us more responsible consumers? Is it the government that could tell us how to do it? Is it purely as consumers that we can just make different choices? Maybe if the product isn't there, we can't. What is it? So similarly, what is, you know, the role of education in helping people change their idea about consumption? So within each of these goals, what's needed is a lot of different actors to work together. Each one of these can only be achieved by partnerships for the goals, and that's why that 17 one is in. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is how. How do you actually create those partnerships for the goals? I'll just go up to my slightly slide. So ultimately, the context for all of this is that our society stands at a fork in the road. We can either continue to do nothing, and we will destroy the ecosystem that sustains us. And here in Goa, what that means is it's going to destroy our quality of life, because I think you can already see it's happening. So another option is that we can choose to act and act differently, and that we can create new pathways to prosperity and that protect our health and wealth. The question is, which journey do we want to go on? Because whilst we have all of this here as a framework, what's needed is people to actually step up and do it. And I think there's a sense now that there's a real urgency. There's a real urgency that perhaps there wasn't before around about taking action. And the thing about partnership is partnership and collaboration is really just another word for shared leadership. We need to share leadership for this thing Not wait for this government to mandate it or that company to change this or whatever. We need to be the leaders to make it happen. So I'll just very quickly tell you about the second project that I was involved with. This was across Europe. So we did this 14-city project. That was really good fun. We learned a lot. We changed a lot of things. Marks & Spencer still runs that program, an iteration, that many years later. They've expanded it to people with disabilities. They've expanded it to all kinds of excluded groups. It's been a really successful model. The second project, we had 10 companies. So my background is in corporate. How can companies be a force for good in development? We know that NGOs and educators and governments have been trying to shift the needle in social change for a long time. The new people on the stage are business. And so a lot of the work that I've come through is about how do you actually leverage business assets, business expertise, business involvement and leadership to move things. Interestingly, a while back, we did some research, and I need to check whether it's still the case, but in India, when they do a trust index, business actually comes top of the trust index because trust in government and NGOs is so bad that by default, business rises to the top. So actually, there is a massive role for business in bringing people along, in championing what needs to be done. And part of our role is to inspire that kind of leadership. So the second project I worked on, this was between 2004 and 2006, was we had 10 companies, Citibank, KPMG, IBM, Microsoft, Cisco, amazing, big, lovely, famous names. And they were looking at how do we create social investment programs across geographies. I am the vice president of IBM EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. How do I create a policy inside my organization that means that we are aligned internally, but that it means that in Paris, Frankfurt, Madrid, London, Stockholm, wherever we may be, it's actually rooted in what is the problems there and not something imposed internationally. So we worked across 5 countries and we looked and learned about what actually makes a difference in terms of engaging in these practices. So I'm going to share with you some of what we learned there, and I'm going to share with you some of what I learned after that, because after I did that project, I then decided, hang on a second, these projects are really complicated. I mean, in that project, the international one, I had a leadership team of 10 vice presidents, all at leadership level. I had a practitioners group of 10 practitioners who were the people implementing that. I had 5 NGOs in 5 different countries who were all also working, and then there was the EU. I mean, there were it was multi-headed beast. And to be honest, I was really stressed out. So I did a course in how to facilitate partnerships. How do we actually facilitate this? And what are the methodologies? What has been learned already? I can't be having to wing this constantly. After doing that course, I became a bit of an evangelist. And I said, everybody needs to know this. This needs to get out there. If we're going to actually make a difference, if we're going to save ourselves and all the species that need to be saved, if we're going to save our humanity, we need to get much better at doing this collaboration piece. So from 2007, my work has been in building capacity for organizations to do partnering better and more consciously. What that meant, I was working through the organization that I trained with and a number of other organizations that specialized in this coming out of the UK. What it meant is through them, I suddenly got sent as a consultant to Rwanda for care, to assess their partnership strategy, to Bangladesh to work on a rural program to train up different marketplace people around a food security project, to Burma to look at. So I was traveling around, predominantly Asia and Africa, and during this time I was looking at this development machine and thinking, no, this is not working. The old way that development has been happening is imbued with deep power dynamics. Programs get designed in countries where the money is or in places where the money is. There's no sense of what is actually needed on the ground. Power follows the money. There's a sense that actually, I mean, the worst of it was when I was on this Turkey-Syria border and I had a whole lot of Syrian NGOs saying, we just want training in how to mobilize civil society. We've never had civil society mobilization. We weren't allowed it under Assad. We now need to learn this because ISIS is coming. And unless we can offer a really viable alternative to ISIS, we're lost. Meanwhile, all the big international NGOs were sending blankets and food parcels. They said, we have our own blanket factories in Syria. We don't need your blankets, thank you. Please teach us how to mobilize in civil society level. So you go back and you think, why isn't this happening? Oh, because they're not in a development phase of their crisis. They're in an emergency stage of their crisis. And in emergency, you don't offer civil society strengthening. You offer food and you offer blankets. So hang on a second, how is this going so wrong? How is it possible that the people who are delivering at vast cost support are not talking to the people who need the support? And the staggering reality is most of the time, that conversation never happens. Somebody gets an idea, they want to put money into a particular area, health, sanitation, whatever. They design a tender, they don't talk to anyone, they put it out, and then there's a whole army of people that kind of come into a development chain. And the end result, the end user or beneficiary never gets to shape and design what they actually need. And now that is a serious problem. So that is what led me now, in the last couple of years, as well as I do that international work, which to be honest pays the bills, I also now have been deeply involved in Goa in learning about, okay, what matters on the ground? What are the obstacles to sustainable development happening here? How can we do what's needed here? And how can we empower local people to actually shape what their sustainable development journey is? Because otherwise it's always going to be mandated from a central government or a state government or USAID or whatever it is. So that's why I work for a number of organizations that do this partnering work with organizations. But here in Goa, I'm deeply, deeply passionate and in a learning phase and working on how do we mobilize communities. Because each one of us here, outside of whatever affiliation we are a community member in Goa. We drink this water, we eat the food that's here, we travel on the transport here. So, life on land, we impact it as a community member outside of whatever job we have. So it's really important to bridge the gap between the international, the sort of structural, and actually people on the ground. So, what was I going to say next? Yeah, so essentially I found myself in this fascinating situation because internationally I'm in these forums where they're talking about sustainable development goals and how great it is, we're going to collaborate, and these are the frameworks. And now I'm living in a village in Goa, and what I see on the ground is completely opposite to any of this stuff. It's opportunism, it's unsustainable development. It's like, how can there be such a gap? And so for me, the really fascinating thing is, how can we bridge that gap so that we can bring, so that local development actors actually have access to the kind of information and approaches that they need. So hopefully, one of the things is I would love to take whatever I'm sharing with you today and all the other materials and to look at how we can get it out at scale at a sort of local level and equip people at the local level with the skills they need to negotiate better sustainable development and to understand. So that's the work that I do as Cirkelvallas, is very much Goa-based and about how do we bring people together using participatory methods. So the reason for showing this one is because urgent action is really, really needed. And we have this outdated model of progress. And we fundamentally have to change our entire way of doing everything. It's a bit daunting. I think maybe that's why people don't tend to get stuck in. So I just want to go through some of the pieces that we've learned and what is it that organizations can do. So firstly, what I've observed from working with a lot of organizations, from Microsoft and all of those companies to the aid agencies to big NGOs, small NGOs, is that first and foremost, be strategic. It says what strategies can support collaboration. And the first thing is be strategic. Don't pay it lip service. So where there are organizations, I think CSR has had a very bad reputation because of the greenwashing and a sense of lip service. actually what we need now is we need people, human beings, because we're all human beings, who happen to find themselves inside organizations. And organizations are like instruments for achieving change, right? They're ways that we do, the way that we manage to do things is we come together in an organization and we get things done. So actually, the organization is a great mechanism for us to get things done. So strategically, what we need is we need leaders to make this part of the strategy. What is it strategically that an organization, whether it's a government body or a business or an NGO, what are your core strategic interests and your core stakeholders? And now which of these most fits into your key area? And then how are you going to embed it? Make an actual strategy, build it into your plan. You wouldn't believe how many people have their activity here and it never features as part of their strategy, which means they never really assign appropriate resource, either human or money. It's never really mainstreamed into the core reporting inside of an organization. The indicators for someone's performance review are not linked to it. It sits outside. So we can't shift things that way. That is lip service. We need to bring the whole thing into the strategy and understand what needs to change inside of an organization to enable better partnering to take place. So the TPI, the Partnering Initiative, is one of the organizations I work for. This is their framework, our framework, to work with organizations. And you can't see, it's a bit blotchy, we're not quite sure why that is. But essentially, what we need to look at is leadership and strategy. Every organization needs to look in, okay, what is our strategy for how we're going to engage? Where's our leadership going to be? Who are we going to actually make this and champion this? And there's a lot of other things in there that I'm not going to go through. What about our systems and processes? If I had money for every time I've heard, oh, it was all going really well until the finance team then didn't respond in the way that I wanted to, and then suddenly the whole thing fell apart. Or we'd agreed on the branding, and then suddenly that organization went off and it came in the newspaper that it's their project and not our project. Or the legal team have suddenly come back and we thought we'd negotiated something, and they've come back and it feels like a slap on the wrist with a ruler and all the goodwill. Actually, what needs to happen is systems and processes need to be changed in order to be able to work collaboratively, because we're not used to that. We're used to a servant-master relationship. I employ you, you do what I say because I pay you. And you may have a different opinion, but fundamentally, I pay you. Similarly, I contract you for some work. You are going to deliver some work for me. We can have a conversation about what might be best, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, chances are I say because I'm paying. And it's not, that's my baby, sorry. When we're working collaboratively, that doesn't work. You can't pull the money card, because people they're not forced to collaborate with you. They need to want to collaborate with you. They need to understand why they're collaborating with you. What is the value for them, for their stakeholders, etc. And so we need to create the conditions that enable better collaboration to take place. Skills and support, so that's about capacity building. And what you can't read here is a humility about what our organization can achieve on its own. So I think often people, on the one hand, we want organizations to show leadership, but on the other hand, it's important that we recognize that nobody owns something. And so how can we actually bring in people and share the glory? So it's like glory, but shared glory. Along with the strategy, it's really, sometimes people find it distasteful, this idea that it needs to be strategically important and in line with your organizational goal. But if it's not, like one should be, if it's not, then it's not going to sustain. And what we need is organizations to be in for the long term, because change doesn't happen overnight. Impact, this is not going to happen overnight. This is going to happen if we're going to change across those SDGs, because people continue to get involved, learn what's from the mistakes, carry on. And so if we want prolonged engagement and prolonged investment of resource and time and effort, and it is an investment of time and effort, let's be no doubt about it. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's time consuming. So if we're going to do that, then it needs to understand, how is your organization benefiting? What is the case for staying involved? And then you've got a longer term option. The conscience motivation is not strong enough of its own. it won't, next time there's some lack of funds, it'll get sidelined. And what we need is not intermittent, we need sustained inputs. So the second piece is collaborate internally. Like without exception, every organization that I've worked with has as much challenge partnering and collaborating internally as they do with anybody else. So for example, your marketing, your leadership team, your sales, your regional offices, half of them don't know what they're doing, half of them like each other are doing, and when somebody's working with you and trying to collaborate with you, you're hearing completely different messages from across the same organization. When I was working with M&S, what was quite funny is they would come to me and say, what's happening in Cardiff? Because I would have more information about what's going on in their offices than they did as an external, because people would talk in a different way. So organizations themselves need to figure out how can we ensure better collaboration internally. The other piece, and I've mentioned it, is about showing leadership. So in the two programs that I was working on, I was part of an organization which had 75% of the FTSE 100 in membership, which is huge. Is it really hot in here, or is it just me? It's getting warm, isn't it? Okay, sorry. So what we did is we got business leaders to champion something and then invite people on board. And this is the same. What we need now is organizations to invite people in and take leadership. Like every organization in this room could decide to take one of those goals and within that one key change and say, I'm going to take responsibility for moving this forward. And every organization in Goa could also say, I'm going to take responsibility for this and I'm going to invite everybody that's needed. I care enough about this to make a difference. So again, it's just about showing leadership. So the other piece is around, let me see what my slides are doing. So the other piece is around, and I mentioned it before, sort of learning by doing and rapid prototyping. So a lot of the learning has come that actually we need to start doing something with people and learn as we go what's working, what's not working. Because particularly when you come together with a group of organizations, mostly they've never worked together before. They have no idea how best to organize themselves and they have no idea exactly what the shape of that project is going to look like. So if you can create an environment in which it's okay to make mistakes, let's talk about what's not working, let's have a continual review process to help us course correct, then you've got a much better chance of iterating optimal. Often what happens is we set systems and structures in place and then we stick to them and they're not working, but we just stick with them anyway. And we sort of accept suboptimal. But actually, the only way of getting to really slick, efficient operations in a collaborative, multi-headed beast is to figure out what's working, what's not working. Is it monthly meetings? Is it bi-weekly meetings? Is we need to rotate where we go? What are the different things that are going to help us? Maybe somebody can never do Fridays. Okay, let's figure that. We need to learn, because what happens is if we don't learn what's working and not working, people back away. They disengage. And there's a lot of reasons why people disengage. So when I said that we're in for the long term, this is something called the partnering cycle. And many of you are probably familiar with a project cycle, project management cycle. So a partnering cycle basically is exactly the same thing. It says you're going, in any collaboration, you go through a sort of scoping and building and feeling your way through stage. Often, internationally or at a sort of strategic level, people may have an agreement to partner or an MOU before they've actually scoped out a lot of the details, which is not very helpful, because then you suddenly found you're married to people and you haven't got exactly the same idea about where you're going at all. But there's a whole scoping and building phase which is really necessary to check that there is strategic alignment. Again, I mean, I was in Sierra Leone and in Freetown, and there was a WASH platform with 10 organizations working to change sanitation in Freetown. And tragically, 10 years down the line, all they'd managed to do was to carve out which part of Sierra Leone they were going to work on. They didn't have a single private sector agency working with them. Sanitation, why can't we? In 10 years, you should have a state-of-the-art sanitation system. that's a good framework for a state. But no, because they hadn't been thinking strategically. So it's really important that you really stay strategic in terms of system transformation and not just delivering projects together. Let me just, I've got a slide that might, where is that? No. So I will talk through a little bit about that strategic piece in a sec. But so essentially, this is a project management cycle for a partnership. You have to pay as much attention to setting it up, to how you manage, to how you review and revise so that you iterate the best possible option. And then, how are you going to sustain it? Often, collaborative platforms don't need to last forever. They just need to be there to iterate something. Or maybe they do need to last forever, but you need to ask that question. And so being conscious that this is a journey that partners go on together, and it never happens neatly in that way. You're pinging across in all different ways. But essentially, you are on a journey, and you need to be able to walk that together through the tough times and the good. And that's why it's important that we understand how to behave with each other. Because at base, partnerships and collaboration is about people within organizations. So I just want to share with you here some of the key partnering challenges. So one of them is about anxiety about difference. They're not like us, they don't think like us, they want different things. So here's keeping a key principle that actually what we want is diversity. The whole point of a partnership is you want different things coming in. Without that diversity, we can't get the new value, the new opportunities that are needed. It's because of that creative spark that something new can come. So we have to recognize when we get triggered when somebody thinks something completely different from us. And that's okay. How can we hold space for diverse opinions, conflicting opinions, argument? How can we hold the space for us to have an argument and it not be the end of the partnership, the end of the collaboration, but be an opportunity for us to learn more, to find the little grits that need to be worked on? Power imbalance always shows up. And it's interesting when you show this slide around different places, who the big guy is. That could be something to do with personality or caste. It could be something to do with how much money the people have. It could be whether they're government or not. There's usually somebody either, usually not necessarily knowingly, exerting power. And then these little guy, you can't read it. He says, well, it was only an idea. So you've brought people in because they bring assets and resources and perspectives that you need to make it happen, but then you're not creating the opportunity for them to actually put them on the table. So key principle is establishing equity. How do we create a condition where the people there are always going to be somebody with more money and more power. So how do we, in this space, minimize that difference? How do the people with the power learn to step back, and how do the people without power learn to step up and find their voice? And part of our role in facilitating partnerships is to help that take place. Hidden agendas and hidden interests. So the guy's got his mask on with his smiley face, but actually behind it he's not. So again, this happens all the time. How's everything? Fine. So if we're going to get to that optimal collaboration, then we need to be okay about saying, this does not work. I'm not happy about this. So we need to create an environment of openness. And so all of these are not hard frameworks. This is about us paying attention to the human element. Because if I feel you're lying to me, I don't trust you. And if I don't trust you, I don't really want to work with you. So all of it comes down to how are we making people feel around that table. Competitiveness. So often this happens when you've got NGO relationships, particularly, because they're competing for funding in other areas, and there's a certain sense of wanting to own certain outcomes. And so a key thing is learning how to create a context for mutual benefit, for win-win is another word. We need to create opportunities for everyone to get value. And this goes back to this idea that actually there is a self-interest involved in good collaboration. It's okay for that self-interest to be there. Can we accept that a company needs to make money, and therefore, or an NGO needs some publicity? Can we not find that too distasteful and say, okay, how can I help you achieve what you need so that our common goal can be better achieved? There's loads of examples of how when you know what somebody really needs and you give it to them, then things can go a lot smoother. It might be completely outside of the core collaborative thing. And the last one is about uncertainty. We none of us know what we're doing. And it's really quite, we don't know what's happening. This change is so vast and quick. And we don't know if these are the right people, and we don't know if this is the right project. And we're just not sure, and maybe we should just not act. And that's not what we need now. That time is gone. Now we need courage. We need courage to say, I'm going to give this a go. Let's give this a go. I need courage to be able to speak up to my senior and say, this way that we're engaging doesn't work. I need courage at every stage. And so a lot of these things you'll see, they're not about management speak. It's about, as a human being, what is it that's needed inside me? Sorry, I'll just go back again. So, so just going back to that, no, I've said that. So essentially, the next piece is around conscious collaboration. So as you can see, there's some things that we need to pay attention to. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. But we need to reflect and we need to think. Quite often, most of the time when we're collaborating, it's one of 75 things we're doing, and we rush from one meeting to the other, and we haven't put any thought into it, and we just land up there and we're doing it. And usually we don't sit and reflect afterwards. What happened? What didn't happen? What's reading the room? What's actually going on here? And so part of the thing is around building awareness and capacity to be conscious about how we collaborate. Are we paying attention to these principles? Do we know where we are on the cycle? Are we trying to build consensus, or are we actually trying to open things up to create more opportunities? You know, what is our purpose? What is our role? What are we doing in any given time? Now, obviously, I'm passionate about this because that's what I do. I go around the world and I train people, and I feel very passionate about it. But just equipping staff with what they need to be able to do a good job and giving them the space to do it. Not just recognizing that this will take time, and not saying, well, you had 75 targets and now actually this building relationships, which takes a lot of time, actually isn't part of your targets. So there's no time associated for it, which is what mostly happens. So the next thing, which I've touched on, which is around involving communities and people. So often, local people are considered beneficiaries. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to receive what you magnanimous development people are going to give me. And it just doesn't work because you don't get the best structured design programs. In Australia, there's a term, nothing about us without us. Because the Aboriginal community there have had so many programs landed on them, they haven't been involved in designing them. They've just been beneficiaries on the assumption that they have nothing to offer. Nothing about us without us. If it's about how local people or how young people need to make changes in their transport or in education or in any of the goals that we look, we need to bring those voices in and how we shape it, how we design it. We need to be much more participatory in terms of listening to the different voices, because if we're working at a system level, we need to understand that system to the best of our ability. And that won't come from only listening to one or two voices. We need as much intel as we can across different voices to help shape things. So, just very quickly, so traditionally, we have kind of transactional relationships with people. Within work, we have a service delivery, you can subcontract your work, we have funding relationships, and we transfer risk. That's generally how the non-collaborative way of working works. In collaboration, we're actually, like I said, nobody has to be there. Nobody's forced. So we need to understand what is going to keep people engaged and contributing their resources, their people, and over the long term. And part of that is that they've helped shape it. If it's mine, I'm going to stay in, then if it's yours, I might be in or out if it's yours. But if it's mine, then I feel more ownership. Secondly, there's a sense of mutual accountability. It's not this servant-master relationship. We need to actually have shared accountabilities and understand how we relate to each other differently. So it's not saying that these are good and these are bad. Fundamentally, within any collaborative relationship, there will be transactional pieces. I may want you to facilitate some money to me for this project, but the basis of our relationship is not that. The basis of our relationship is equity. You and I are both needed to solve this problem. Our organizations are both needed. So we have an equitable equal voice to be heard. And then within that, there might be a contractual relationship. But we don't treat each other in a way that says, I'm the money, you do what I say. And that sounds basic, but actually you wouldn't believe how often that happens. I'm just going to read through because I'm worried about time. So I think so ways to engage. I don't know where somebody said ways to engage. So just thinking through what are the different ways that organizations can get involved. So this goes down through a increasing level of commitment, engagement, effort, cost. So at the very minimal level, we can look at financing and philanthropy. So an organization can collaborate and support the SDGs by funding something. But most organizations get really annoyed, particularly businesses, if that's what they're seen as, a cash cow, because they've got so many other resources. They've got amazing people and premises and all kinds of assets that have huge value. And sometimes as organizations, particularly NGOs, when we're approaching business, we need to understand how to make that ask much broader and look at a sort of range of resources, which I'll look at other ways. Endorsement and cause-related marketing. So as a business, you can take a cause and you can champion it. But additionally, as a government, you can endorse certain things. The power of promotion, the power of your brand is a really important piece. And sometimes, and that's cheap. So, you know, again, if we can find leaders within organizations particularly passionate about something, then we can work with them to endorse and make that cause more prominent. Then there could be ecosystem or community investment and engagement. Now that's where organizational resources go into community organizations on building the ecosystem. So let's say we want no hunger. So no hunger is about the food system. It's about farmers, it's about food distribution, it's about retailers, it's about markets, it's about consumers. I mean, it's about health. I mean, actually, it's a huge, huge thing. So within that, what an organization can do is to say, okay, there are some of these farmers associations that are really struggling. They're the weak link in the chain. I know I'm going to invest my people to give pro bono. I'm going to invest my assets, let them use my office. I'm going to help them, you know, let them come in and use our logistics network. Like there's so many different assets that an organization has that can support the ecosystem to build up. So building the strength of the field. Free products and services if it's a company. So this at this point may or may not be like what we would consider to be an equal partnership. Then you have a strategic partnership, which is what I've been talking about till date, which is where you're really looking at changing a system. It's more than investing in the community. It's really about how are we going to change the system and having a common vision around that. And that is where we want to be co-creative in how we design. It's about leveraging the passion and expertise of all partners. And it may involve all of the above. Like within your strategic partnership, there's lots of different ways. But it's really about how you engage that makes something a strategic partnership or not. If I'm going to just give money to an organization, it's great. I'm not saying it's not great. But it's different from sitting down, CEO to CEO, and saying, what difference can we make in the world? And having those strategic conversations. And then the last piece is around core business. So if we look at the SDGs, maybe what's involved with an organization is changing its core mandate, making different products, focusing on something different. And that's quite a big thing for an organization to have to deal with. But actually, looking into how the business can be furthered or the organization can be furthered by doing this is really exciting. New models for achieving those and creating value. So just to review, be strategic, collaborate internally for change, take leadership, seek to create value for all, learn by doing, this prototyping approach, build capacity in yourself and in others for that internal piece. And that consciousness is about reflecting. Take time. feel into what's going on. It's not just your mind, it's your heart and your gut, because this is about what's happening in the room. You've been in rooms where you're like, you could cut this atmosphere with a knife. What is going on? How can you feel and sense into that? Because it matters. It matters that we end hunger. So it matters that we figure out the ego problem that's going on in this room and we solve it. And so a lot of it is about solving ego problems. So I just want to very quickly touch on place-based initiatives. So I've talked mostly at the moment, maybe that's a bit confusing to have that on while I talk, but I've talked mostly at the moment about organizations coming together to make a particular difference. But obviously over the last few years, there's been like huge numbers of alliances and coalitions that have come up. So the field is changing a lot. And those coalitions might be sort of advocacy, let's change policy on this. They might be delivery. They might be whole types of different types of agenda for these platforms. My personal experience is that things need to happen on the ground somewhere. There are great policy partnerships, but if it's not happening on the ground somewhere, then is it really making a difference? So part of it is about looking at place-based initiatives. What is it that you can get involved with as an organization where you are and work with others on it? And the thing about place-based initiatives is that, So I'm just going to quickly run through a few of them because they offer, on the one hand, a really interesting, they offer platforms for us to leverage people in. So if an organization, if I'm talking about ending hunger in sort of abstract, it's very different from saying, we're going to end hunger in Saligal. Now, there might not be so much of hunger in Saligal, but let's take sustainable communities. So then the question is, how do we do it here? And each context is completely different, and each set of stakeholders are completely different. So until you actually get involved on the ground, it's hard to really move the needle. So I just wanted to talk through a couple, because often you might have organizations that come together and drive something. So Stop TB or whatever. These are platforms. It's not a government mandated thing. It's just organizations coming together. That is valuable. And the business coalitions that I worked on in the UK, they definitely did work. However, I think there's something valuable here in India in some of these government mandated platforms, because they offer an opportunity to try and get in and change things. So an example, so SDG 12 is sustainable consumption. At the moment, Goa government is considering a strategy for resource efficiency in tourism and construction. It's within this sustainable consumption piece. Now, that will require a lot of different stakeholders working together and an infrastructure to enable the kind of dialogue and communication that you were talking about, and the flows of data and understanding how we can learn what's working and not working together work. So this is something which I've been involved with in terms of the stakeholder consultations, and I'm personally very excited about it because it means that there are resources and a mandate to make it happen that otherwise we don't always have. I know that we had that for Swachh Bharat as well, and I'm interested, and I would like to know more, and I know that a number of you in the room who've worked on it, in what kind of collaborative infrastructure was actually put in place to make that work. Because from the outside, I saw a lot of projects, but I'm not sure that I saw a collaborative infrastructure that really enables collaboration at scale to take place. And there's a lot of the latest thinking now about changing the ecosystem. What are the flows of information? And I'm taking a sort of systems approach to it. So I just wanted to say that's one option which is exciting. The other one is SDG 11, which is Sustainable Cities and Communities. Our three friends here from Smart Cities are involved in setting up a innovation hub around, well, I'll let you talk to people about it a bit later. But essentially, this is looking at how can innovation for the SDGs be facilitated in Goa. Super exciting. It's within the Smart Cities framework. Money is available. Government officials have it somewhere on their list of things they need to do. And therefore, it's a helpful mechanism on which the other people can mobilize collaboration. There's also some locally driven platforms. So again, this is a gratuitous pitch. So I and Dean and a number of others have been working on something called Act for Goa, which is a platform to get information available to people so that people can make everyday actions that are in line with the SDGs and Sustainable Development Goals. There's also Sensible Earth, and you've seen it, and also Dean, in terms of it's a physical space to try and mobilize and bring together different actors and foster sustainable business models. And I know that there's overlap here. I know that we've got the future we need, which I haven't put up there because it's beyond Goa, but actually looking at how do we really mobilize around these particular platforms. And that's interesting because the future we need isn't a place-based campaign, it's at the macro level. But Goenchi Mati is, and then there's a question about how do we mobilize different organizations on that. So, where are we? So, ultimately, what is required of us is leadership. I've shared some of the ways things happen. I'm really happy to talk more off the time. I think I'm out of time now, and we need to move into Q&A. But I'm really happy to talk more with people. I will definitely be doing a training in the not too distant future to say, okay, in support of this resource efficiency and in support of the Innovation Hub, how do we get capacity out there so that people can facilitate, they can do what I do, basically facilitate these kind of partnerships happening. But fundamentally, it's about a new form of leadership, because I think the old form of leadership is dying. We're not going to solve the SDGs, we're not going to deliver them through hierarchy. We're going to deliver them through unleashing the potential of everybody here as a leader in whatever sphere they're in, because even if you're not within an organization, you're part of your community. And these initiatives are about saying, okay, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to make a difference where I am. And then you can leverage people into that. You can bring organizations in. So place-based, you can be a person that says, I want to help facilitate and negotiate sustainable development for my place. And I'm going to figure out how to pull those together. This is from a book called Building the Bridge and You Walk on It. Reflective action. Let's not be headless chickens. Stop, calm down, take a breath. What is actually happening? What is actually needed now? Authentic engagement. Let's not pretend. The time for chit-chat is over. Open inquiry. Let's recognize we don't know. None of us know. Nobody knows how to achieve those goals. The only way we can do it is by having the humility to be in learning mode and work through and have the courage to go through the tough times together. Grounded vision, personal courage, detached interdependence, responsible freedom, and tough love. We have to somehow embody all of these within ourselves and make the changes ourselves. So my invitation to you, I'm going to close now before we go into Q&A, but my invitation is to think through, what is it that you care about? What are those goals, of all those goals, what most makes you, and then let's figure out a way to mobilize organizations and different stakeholders to make a difference, because goodness knows we need this in Goa. And there's lots of things happening and frameworks, and we can work together. So just think through, if you were going to make a difference on one thing, one area, what difference would that be? Thank you. I'll just